Now, we know the consequences of too much sweetener, so why not just use something like aspartame? Not so fast, says our guest, Cori Brackett. In her movie Sweet Remedy, Cori talks about the toxic effects of aspartame. To open this discussion, I asked Cori if she could be more specific about the risk of aspartame.
Well, there are 92 symptoms, believe it or not.
92.
Released to the public through a Freedom of Information Act, to the FDA, consumer complaints about aspartame. Various things, such as headaches were number one, which you might think, oh, well, I can deal with a headache. It can also be migraines and dizziness. It can be confusion, memory loss, like thinking in a fog. And then it can go into such things as slurring of speech, tachycardia, which is rapid heartbeat, and sudden cardiac death. So then it becomes a much more serious issue when you get down the list. But part of the reason that it's so profuse, a lot of people look at it and go, well, this can't be real because there are so many symptoms that people associate with it. They're associating it with everything. But a lot of them are neurological in their base form, and neurological, once you get into that realm, you're dealing with the brain, and the brain is kind of like the master conductor of the body and can affect just about every functioning system that you have. So it can be a really insidious issue.
Well, so there's lots of questions that come up about that. But first, for people to know, you produced a documentary called, Sweet Misery, A Poisoned World?
Yes.
And it was about this whole issue of aspartame. But you had a personal experience. So before we go into the general things, what happened to you?
Well, this was the foundation of why I drove across the country and did some research about this and wanted to find out the truth. In 2002, I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. And at first, as you can imagine, I was absolutely floored, horrified, panic-struck, didn't know what to do. And then I began to do some research and kept finding aspartame in conjunction with MS or MS-like symptoms. And I went, wait a minute here. I used to drink about a 6-pack a day of diet soda for 20 years. Maybe there's something to this whole rumor. But a lot of times, the whole issue with aspartame, it's framed as an internet rumor. So one of the goals that I had, and wound up with Sweet Misery as a result, was to actually find out if the people that I was reading about on the internet were real. And I found out that, yes, they were real, and the information, the evidence was in the congressional record. There was a lot of research papers that were showing that there was an issue here, and I found out that there was a lot more behind this than just, oh, gee, is aspartame safe and good for you, like as good as bananas and milk, like they used to say in the beginning.
Bananas and milk, my... Well, so you found out a lot. You found out, first of all, some things that led you to believe that the aspartame was certainly an activator in your own MS, right?
Yes. Actually, I've been very well since doing that, since eliminating aspartame from my own diet, and I have noticed a very distinct difference in how my body does react. And that's something that I think is very, very important ultimately, is to learn to listen to your own body. That is the final evidence, I believe, in what is good and what is working and what is not. And there's such a disconnect between ourselves and our bodies nowadays. We're taught to turn to somebody else for what's going on, what's wrong with us, not to look and to listen to ourselves and to find that place within ourselves where we can learn if something is good for us or not.
Boy, howdy. We have gotten to a place where we look to the marketing person, the authority, the guru, the teacher, the whatever, or what our neighbors say so that we can fit in. And this is creating a tremendous challenge in our society because we're doing things that are just plain bad for us. Now, the aspartame thing is interesting to me because obviously aspartame is an FDA-approved substance, right? So how is it that something with this kind of challenge can get FDA approval?
Well, there was a lot of political triage that went on, according to attorney Jim Turner, who we spoke with for Sweet Misery. It was a very long process. It was discovered, according to G.D. Searle, which was the company that first got aspartame approved in the early 80s. It was discovered by one of their scientists in 1965, and it wasn't approved for 16 years. And it's often said that, well, it's the most studied substance. Well, if you look at that, part of the problem was that there kept being brain tumors and so forth, and is really looked at in the Bressler report by Dr. Jerome Bressler. He was the head of this report that was accomplished by the precursor to the FDA when it looked at 3 key studies that were used in approving aspartame, and they found a lot of shenanigans. The most famous one was that one animal in one of the studies was reported alive at week 88. Then it was reported as dead from week 92 through, I think it was 104. Then, miraculously, it was found alive again at week 108.
Well, sort of the Jesus complex, right?
Kind of, yeah. It resurrected itself, on paper at least. And there were tumors that were cut out of animals and all sorts of things like that that really caused people to pause. But then there was a lot of mischief that came about, such as Ronald Reagan, for example. When he became president in 1980, one of the first things that he did was prevent the FDA commissioner at the time from taking any action. And he then replaced that FDA commissioner with Dr. Arthur Hull Hayes. And one of the first things he did was overrule a public board of inquiry that had been put in place to investigate aspartame, and he overruled it to have aspartame approved. So there were a lot of things, a lot of instances that occurred that kind of pushed this substance along towards approval, even when there was a lot of both evidence and opinions that were contrary to getting it approved.
Well, there's also another famous name involved here. So the CEO of G.D. Searle at the time it got its approval was whom?
Well, this information actually caused me to fall off my chair. It was I found out during the first interview that I had with one of the doctors in Sweet Misery. The CEO of G.D. Searle from 1977 to aspartame's approval was none other than our good old friend Donald Rumsfeld.
Right, Donald Rumsfeld, and who's a good pal of Ron Reagan's, and part of the Republican infrastructure. So he and his influence really got this drug approved. And if I call it a drug, because I don't know any other name to call it, and basically trounced all over the medical data. And if somebody else had done something like this, we'd be prosecuted, right?
Well, unfortunately, there's a force in America that has been building for quite a while, and that is a triumph of politics and PR over science. We see this all the time with pharmaceuticals that get rushed through approval with the FDA, and then only later on, when there are lots of deaths or suicides or all sorts of things happening with these drugs, then we suddenly go, wait a minute, maybe this is not quite right. We're kind of like guinea pigs right now, Thomas. I mean, that's how we're being treated with a lot of these substances. And aspartame was a food additive, but there were brain tumors that were coming up in some studies, and that was a violation. To get it approved was a violation of something called the Delaney Amendment, which says that if a substance causes cancer in lab animals, you cannot approve it for use for human use. But it was approved anyway.
Well, there's a orientation there to disapprove things that are we would call alternatives, right? With their supplements or things like even take stevia, right? Which is something that doesn't have a harmful impact generally on people, but the FDA won't let them call it a sweetener.
Well, the interesting thing about that, too, is that Cargill and Coca-Cola right now are coming out with a patentable version of stevia called Truvia. And that is okay, they say. That's going to be approvable. But the natural herb is not approvable. We talked to the Stevita company in Texas, which is a small company, relatively small, that puts out stevia as a dietary supplement, which is the only way that they can market the substance. And they actually had the FDA call them and say that they needed to burn all of their cookbooks that they had at one time that were dealing with being able to cook with stevia. They were saying that you have to burn these books, which is a lot like the Gestapo, which is kind of a frightening idea that in this country they would be looking at the possibility of that type of level of censorship.
How is it that we can get the truth in people's hands so people can be better informed and don't have to take this bad information and make a mess of their lives?
Well, I think ultimately it comes down to word of mouth with programs like yours, creating an awareness with people about another way to operate their lives, looking back from a position of connecting with human beings, with talking with people, with doing something that helps people rather than being of service. That's one thing that I think that we've gotten away from in our business thinking nowadays is we create a need rather than fulfilling a need. And we used to, back in the day, we used to know our barber and our grocer and our plumber and our, everything else. And nowadays, everything has become really streamlined to the point that we do not necessarily know the owner of Target, say. We just go there and there's a different clerk there every time we go. And we're not able to do things. But, a lot of times we can go to things like farmers markets and we can connect with the farmer himself or herself, and we can go back to the time. We can refuse to participate in the world that the very large corporations have set up and return to a place where we're patronizing places like Megabus, where they, are looking towards service. And we can do that. We can have the power. And I think that we as consumers don't think we have any power, but we do.
That's really a good point. And, one of the powers we have is to inform ourselves. And you give a lot of information to people about what to look for when they're reading the ingredients labels on products. So what is it people look for to make sure they're not going to get themselves into an aspartame world unknowingly?
Well, one of the easiest ways that I have found, because I've had myself a problem with reading the fine print on occasion of some products, is to look for a phenylalanine warning. Phenylalanine is, or phenylketonuria warning, which is...
And just one second, those are big words, so we'll put that information on our website so people can see it spelled out and know what to look for.
Yep, phenylketonuria is a metabolic genetic disorder where people cannot metabolize phenylalanine, which happens to be 50% of the aspartame molecule, which also phenylalanine is an amino acid, so you might think that that's fine. However, it's 50% the molecule, and our bodies are not equipped to deal with any type of nutrient to our bodies in that disruptive, huge amount. It's flooding the system, and the system can't be used to dealing with that. So it can create some problems that way, according to many of the doctors that I've spoken with. But they do have a warning on any product that contains aspartame about the phenylalanine content because of these phenylketonuriacs. So you can see that warning, which is separate from the ingredient list.
I assume that warning is in super small print.
It is.
So take your glasses to the grocery store, folks.
There are a lot of people who take magnifying glasses with them, or a magnifying glass to be able to read the fine print and check and see if there's something that's safe for them to eat or not. So
we have to watch. We have to be careful because everything just about has aspartame in it that says low calorie, zero carbs, all those things, right? They use one of this aspartame or derivative to sweeten the thing up, right?
The last time I checked, it was in over 6,000 products.
My gosh. Well, it's a great service to us all for you to wake us up, help us get educated, help us do the right thing in our body, help us not activate something in our body like happened to you, which is really a terrible thing to happen. And I know there's a story, I think, at the end of the documentary about a woman named Diane Fleming. Is that right? What happened to her?
She was convicted of murdering her husband with methanol poisoning, and the possibility of aspartame.